Chip Reid is with the president out in Hawaii. The rest of our correspondents are around the table with us here in the studio. We want to say especially a welcome to Jan Crawford, who you saw a lot of on Face the Nation back when she was the legal correspondent for the Chicago Tribune. She's back with us now, back where she belongs. Her blog, Crossroads, is already up on the CBS website. We expect to see a lot of you, Jan,
Thanks,
right
Bob.
here at
well,
this
it's great
table.
to be back.
Thank you. Well, let's get right to the big story. And the news overnight, of course, was that the U.S. Embassy and the British Embassy in Yemen have been closed because of a security threat. David Martin, what have you been able to find out about this?
Usually when you close an embassy, it's because there's been chatter on the internet and on cell phones about some sort of vague attack against Western interests. That's different from what almost happened on Christmas Day in Yemen. There was a specific plot to attack the American embassy on Christmas Day, and the U.S. preempted that attack with an airstrike of its own. It launched jets off a carrier and cruise missiles from ships offshore, and it hit 2 training camps in Yemen. And General David Petraeus has said that they intercepted 4 suicide bombers who were on their way to the capital. And they also killed some senior al-qaeda in Yemen operators. So when you look at that and you remember what else happened on Christmas Day, namely the near miss on the bombing of the airliner inbound to Detroit, al-qaeda in Yemen really was planning a Christmas surprise.
So what you're telling us here is these were U.S. aircraft flying off a U.S. carrier that carried out this strike. We heard about that there had been some strikes, but the credit seemed to be going to the Yemenis. This was a U.S. operation.
It was. The Yemenis gave the green light. It was done with their permission, but this was an American strike conducted with American intelligence and designed to preempt an attack against an American target.
But apparently, Bob Orr, they still think the threat is out there because today both the British Embassy and the American Embassy in Yemen have been closed. What about this guy that was caught on this attempt on the U.S. airliner? He's been talking a lot since they took him into captivity.
After he was arrested, we're talking about Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, the man on Northwest Flight 253. After he was arrested, he almost immediately gave up everything to the FBI. In fact, he was so cooperative that one investigator said it was almost like he was bragging, and there was some fear that maybe he was spreading disinformation. Turns out so far that the story he has told has checked out every step of the way. He said he went to Yemen, check. He said he got explosives there. Said he trained with al-qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula there. He told us one thing that's very haunting, or he told investigators, Bob, and that is that when he was training in Yemen, he trained with a number of other people. He didn't know how many. He called them his brothers. He said, though, we were segregated, and he felt that was because he wasn't supposed to know too much about what other people were up to. If you take that information at face value, you have to assume there may be something else out there.
Chip Reid, I take it the president was briefed. We began every news cycle getting word that the president's been briefed. What else is going on out there?
Well, they're talking a lot about what's going to happen when the president gets back to Washington. And I think what you're going to see beginning on Tuesday when the president has this meeting in the Situation Room with the heads of all the various agencies related to Homeland Security is kind of another version of the Afghanistan review. It's going to be very methodical. It's going to be very comprehensive, government-wide, and the president's going to sit down at that table and go around the room and find out all the things that are wrong with the system now. They're not just going to focus on what happened here. They're going to update the entire system. It's going to be very Obama-esque, very cerebral, very intensive, and I'm sure he will be criticized again for being kind of Spock-like rather than emotional, very logical in his response to this, but the White House just doesn't seem to care. They believe that the thing to do is to look at the system with very hard eyes and try to fix it. And as far as any kind of head roll afterwards, is there going to be personal accountability here? They say first you fix the system, then you focus on who's to blame.
Jan Crawford, some of the people involved in this plot were alumni of Guantanamo, and the prison there. They were, this particular person released during the Bush administration. Is this going to cause us, the administration, to rethink what we do about Guantanamo?
Well, Bob, it certainly is going to complicate whatever happens at Guantanamo. I don't think the administration, and certainly we're getting no signals that they're going to rethink the decision to close Guantanamo. Remember, that was a major campaign issue that Obama ran on, and with great fanfare after he was sworn in, he declared it would be closed within 1 year. Now, that year is coming up, January 22nd. Guantanamo is not going to be closed within a year of Obama's executive order that take place. So that's going to take some time, and the question is what's going to happen with these guys down at Guantanamo. There's about 198 right now down there. I think 90 or so of them are Yemenis. I think the last train to Yemen has left the station. So where are we going to go? Obviously, Obama's identified a prison in Thompson, Illinois, but there's no money for that. Democrats turned down a request for about $150 million to get that prison for those Guantanamo detainees. That's going to be a major issue coming in the spring, how they're going to get that prison for those detainees and bring them here. Moderate Democrats are very skeptical.
So you're convinced that they are not going to close this. Have they admitted that to themselves, that they can't close it by the deadline?
President Obama has acknowledged that it's very difficult, practically speaking. They've had some problems with where they're going to put these people. They've had to do an individual review of all these detainees. They've had some pushback here in Congress. But they're prepared now to say, acknowledge, I think what we all kind of like, yeah, there's gambling in Casablanca. This thing's not going to close within that year deadline. They're not going to push back. They still believe that it must close in the interests of our security. They say that it's been kind of this worldwide symbol of what's gone wrong. That's the Obama administration's position. But Bob, I think, when you think about what we're going to do, where are these, 198 or so people going to go? All accounts now are pointing to Thompson, Illinois. But the Democrats in Congress, they haven't been too keen on giving Obama $150 million to bring those people here.
It's one of the questions that really went unanswered during the presidential campaign, because both of the candidates, Barack Obama and John McCain, said we need to close Guantanamo. Because they both said that, we all forgot to ask the next question. How?
Right, and where?
That is what they're dealing with now.
Let's face it, closing Guantanamo is going to be nothing more than a change of address for the detainees, because they still have the procedure of indefinite detention for people you can't take to court because the evidence won't stand up in court for any number of reasons, but you consider too dangerous to release. And that was one of the greatest criticisms of the Bush administration's policy on Guantanamo, and that apparently is not going to change. Their location is going to change.
Nancy Cordes, you came back from Europe yesterday. So did you notice any difference in the security, any difference in procedures?
Absolutely. I mean, we were screened again when we got to the gate. We had to go through security, and then all of our carry-on luggage had to be screened by hand by security personnel. And then when we got onto the airplane, they took away our blankets at the beginning of the flight. They took away our blankets at the end of the flight, ostensibly so that we couldn't hide something on our laps, as this would-be bomber tried to do. But, all of this extra security takes time, and takes manpower to do this kind of thing. So our flight took off late, and I think you're going to see a lot of half-hour delays, hour-long delays, as people wait to go through this extra screening.
Where did you go?
I went through Berlin to Copenhagen, and it was in Copenhagen on our flight to the U.S. That we saw the extra security, and it was only the flights going to the U.S., as far as I could see, that were getting the extra screening.
Chip Reid, Vice President Cheney has been leading the Republican attack. He says that the president simply is pretending that we're not at war with al-qaeda. Isn't the president going to really have to step out and take some decisive action here, if for no other reason than just to counter this kind of criticism from the other side?
Well, you talk to them and they believe he already has, with the two statements that he gave and then the address that he gave yesterday. But, the criticism, and I think the reason it resonates, is because he comes across a bit detached and cerebral when he makes these statements. He doesn't sound angry, and when he finally did express frustration and maybe even a little anger, it wasn't so much toward the terrorists, it was toward the people who didn't stop them. Is there going to be the kind of change in tone that a lot of people really want? I think he's just going to continue to be President Obama. He's not going to get out there with a megaphone and sound more angry than he naturally allows himself to be. So I think you're going to continue to hear that criticism. But the White House, of course, is fighting back very hard. They say, look, he understands the dangers here. He's been talking about it throughout his entire first year, but he doesn't have to beat his chest, as one advisor put it, to prove it.
Jan, some people, critics of the president, are saying that perhaps the response to this was one of the low points of this administration.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about the Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano coming out and insisting that the system worked, and Press Secretary Robert Gibbs saying on this program last week pretty much the same language, that the system has worked, that's a problem. I mean, obviously the American people can look out there and go, well, you know, it didn't. But it's not just those sound bites. I mean, those are sound bites. The reason that's an issue for Obama is that it goes to the bigger question of the competency of his government and the trust that people have in that government. You look at polls show that the trust in government is an all-time low. Domestically, obviously, the stimulus plan hasn't worked, unemployment is high, and so now we have a situation where a terrorist can get on an airplane, seemingly could have been caught if some officials had just done a basic Google search of a database, and the Homeland Security Secretary is insisting the system worked. That doesn't, work. We're in a what people are going to want to know is, does Obama have a plan? What is his plan to fight this long-term war against a determined jihadist enemy? What's the plan, and do Americans have the trust that Obama is competent to fight that long-term war?
Part of the problem for the White House is that their most effective counterterrorism tool right now is one they can't really talk about, and that is this Predator drone campaign that from time to time you hear in the news. There's another strike in Waziristan in Pakistan. They've taken out a Taliban leader, perhaps an al-qaeda leader. I mean, we've killed al-Qaeda number 3 about 4 times already. The CIA will not admit that they're doing this. They just have a policy of plausible deniability. But the fact is, we've done some checking. Under the first 11 months of the Obama administration, they've actually launched more drone strikes against terrorists than the last 4 years of the Bush administration. So it's not quite accurate to say they haven't been aggressive. They have been aggressive at the point of the spear, trying to take out these cell leaders. And I think we're going to see more of those things going forward, because right now they have determined that is the best way to go after the core command and control.
Look at what the Obama administration has done. He approved sending more than 50,000 more troops to Afghanistan. As Bob just pointed out, he increased the number of drone strikes in Pakistan. And now he's opened up this new front in Yemen, ordering U.S. aircraft and U.S. missiles to strike targets in Yemen. That's hardly pretending like you're not at war. I think what he's trying to do is keep the war against terror from overwhelming his domestic agenda. And so he tries to low-key this as much as he can, plus the normal sort of low-key nature of the way he addresses these things.
I want to get back to that, but let me just ask Nancy. He had some momentum going on his number one domestic priority, and that was to get this health care bill passed. The Senate finally passed it. Now they're trying to reconcile it with a House version. Is all of this going to slow down the momentum?
Well, the Democrats can't afford to let the momentum slow down. They need to get a win on health care, and they need to get it quickly, because after all, now we're in 2010 and it's an election year, and they need to have something to run on. So they're going to keep moving full steam ahead on health care, and all of these issues on terrorism, on Afghanistan, are just going to add to what's already on their plate. You're already seeing the Senate Intelligence Committee saying that they're going to hold hearings on the Yemeni issue, on the terrorism issue, the day after they get back from recess, and the House is going to be doing the same thing.
Well, the administration plan was to get the health care bill signed before the president makes his State of the Union in probably the first part of February. Are they going to make that deadline?
That looks very grim. I mean, after all, the Senate doesn't even get back until January 20th. And so that means that they would have, about 2 weeks to reconcile all these differences on how you pay for health care and on abortion and on the public option with the House, work out all those differences, and then hold a series of votes before the State of the Union. Congress doesn't work that fast, even in the best of times.
I'm, for one, if not convinced that it's going to pass. It probably will in the end, but I still think it's not a done deal.